Our opening question is, do generations only get worse? I thought this would be a fun one to sink our teeth into.
Generations.
AKA, what's the matter with kids these days, right? Yes, when you think, right, I'm thinking about the WHO, talking about the generation, right? Yeah, I just open question. I am the one. Yeah, so just some open reflections on, do generations only get worse? Do they get better? What's the matter with kids these days?
Every-
Talking about my generation.
every generation.
Big bonus, a big- for- All right, let's have some reflections. Go ahead.
I think it's a marvelous question, is that I find it difficult to answer quickly without asking this question. To what degree do their values, if they know them, parallel with ours, how we've been brought up?
Good, so maybe it's a question of values. To what degree do they contradict the values we try to instill in them?
Every generation says this about the younger generation under them.
Yeah, so it's sort of this inevitable feeling. I'll say what that makes me think of is, and Nelson, hello, welcome, everybody joining on Zoom. Question is, do generations only get worse? Or do they get better? Or do, what is the sort of the law of entropy or conservation of mass as it pertains to generations? One thing that you said that just made me think of Saturday Night Live, where there was a documentary on Saturday Night Live and it was talking about just, it's now 50. And it was saying that every cast generation, the audience says, oh, this group is nothing compared to my time, right? But everybody's true. They always say SNL is dead. And yet it keeps going somehow. Right? Go ahead, yes. Yeah. Every generation wants to have their children have a better life than they had, right? That's the immigrant story of the American dream. That we will work hard so that our kids won't have to work as hard. They'll be educated, right? We'll give them the opportunities we never got.
Every generation farther from Sinai knows less and less.
Good. I'm glad you brought this up because this.
I figured you'd.
So let me just step that out really. Let me step that out a little bit. So this will be pertinent to our discussion going forward, but our rabbi said that every generation, the further away it got from Sinai, the less Torah we got, right? Because the Sinai generation saw God, literally received Torah, and well, they sent Moses up, but they saw, evidence of God. And so naturally, the further, it's like a game of telephone. Right, things get lost in translation. Okay, go ahead, how come?
And put there.
Perfect.
One, and if we think that this is bounded by, these,
Yeah,
which is really awful.
yeah.
And, we think. But you guys have to know.
Okay, great.
Can I pause you for housekeeping?
Yeah.
First of all, hello, everyone. Rabbi Jacobs, and we're gonna try this sort of every bouncing off that we're gonna teach sort of 2 weeks. 2 weeks of us and 2 weeks of Rabbi Jacobs, and so that's our sort of new going on. We'll see how that works. The next 2 weeks, there is lunch and learn scheduled when many people are traveling. But we want to make sure that there's enough people, and because Lisa's out of town, we're going to be ordering in. So we don't have an unlimited number of things. So please let Rabbi Jacobs know, let us know. If you saw an email, you can register. So far, we only have 6 people registered for lunch next week.
Need a piece of.
Here.
But if you can let us know if you'll be here on the 26th and or the 2nd, January 2nd. What? Yes, Boxing Day for those who celebrate.
It's the first late day of Hanukkah.
Does anybody have a pen on them by any chance? Oh, great. Okay, thank you, thank you.
You not get back to your regularly scheduled.
All right, so we have a very important look at here and then a few more comments and then we will continue on to our text, but.
Isn't the 26th the second day of Hanukkah?
So
What's the first day?
The first day? Okay. We're going to meet on the first day of Hanukkah?
yes, on Thursday, yes.
That was just a question.
Yeah.
We're
yeah,
obviously worse than they last because the original generation would never have done this.
Good, thank you. For bringing us back. So hold on one second. We have an important machloket here that we're going to come back to, right? It'll be sort of the tension of today's session, which is what Ron said, that the further away from Sinai, the more that's lost. Sort of like if you think of it as like a bucket of water and you're pouring it to the next generation and it gets most of it, but there's some that's dropped and lost. And then you keep pouring the bucket and over time it gets less and less from that original, Torah. But then, the look at the debate, the counterpoint to that is actually, no, we're increasing. Each generation builds off of the generation before it. We have more Torah than we did before. More Torah, not less, because we have so much more. We have more commentary. We have more voices, right? Like if you think about it, often I bring you women's midrashim from Dir Shuni. That's new age stuff, right? We didn't have that before. That's more Torah than we had before. But also just literally, if you talk about Rabban Gamliel, or if you talk about Yehuda Hanasi, what did they have? He compiled the Mishnah. They didn't even have the Talmud. So you have these great sages that we think of, right? They didn't have the Talmud. Right? You think of a great sage now, you think of somebody who has mastered the Talmud, right? They were great sages without even the benefit of all that we have now. So the counter argument that Sheila is saying is actually no, generations increase the amount of Torah and are responsible for knowing more. Take medicine or any other field where things are constantly changing and you have to keep with the times in order to continue to administer. Yes, Larry and Bill, and then a couple on Zoom, and we're gonna dive into the text.
When you say worse, what criterion?
Yes.
And I'm saying worse in morals, worse in habits, people that are in education and science, things like that. So what are you comparing generation? Some things are better, some things are worse. So what are you comparing?
Yeah, how do you actually even address that question? Jerry, thank you for volunteering in the kitchen. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Will be.
Three times, which says the same thing. The young people just don't know what their elders knew.
Yeah, they don't make them like they used to, right? Yeah, so. Hold on, wait, I just want to finish one thought. So, but Larry's point, what criteria, like how do you even have that conversation? What's good, what's bad? How are you measuring what's better or worse about generation? Hold on, keep going around the table and then Zoom, yeah.
I'm for inside.
Fair, sorry I didn't get you earlier. Okay.
To say, you mentioned Yehuda Hanasi. The reason he had to compile it all and write it all down was because everybody was forgetting it.
Yeah.
Up until then, everybody knew it.
Yeah, so that's the case for, once again.
Or the counter
Better
argument
before.
that the Romans were pressuring us so much, we had to write it down because we might all be dead.
Yeah, there's that too, right? Okay, good. Bob and then Nelson.
On a housekeeping level, could you please use the microphone because people are breaking up and it's hard to hear the comments.
Yeah.
More-
Yes.
And I gotta move the chair.
Oh, okay. Well, no, it's just gonna be this. So you're good with it. If you have a handout, you're good. What's going on the screen is just the handout.
Okay.
And more to the point, my grandpa didn't have Safaria.
Right, exactly. Yeah, right. We have so much information at our fingertips now. that they didn't have. Nelson, go ahead. And that's a point for and against, right? For, yes, because now we have it, so we can, it's a benefit as a resource. But the con is, well, maybe they didn't need that resource because they memorized it and they had, so there's pros and cons. Okay, Nelson, go ahead.
All right, well, I've got several comments, but one general comment is that with respect to sharing of physical things, when you share them, you have less. If I give you half my sandwich, I have less to eat.
Good.
If I give you my idea, I don't lose anything. Ideas are not physical. So if we're measuring improvement by ideas, we could improve. We don't have to. We could fall back. But if we're measuring it by physical things, then in one sense, we'll go back. But I know I have more money than my father ever had. It's not just inflation.
Yeah.
I had opportunities he never had, and I used them.
Right.
Now, my Orthodox son, when I criticize the rabbis who made the halakha, I say, well, but they know much more than we do. We don't know what exactly they were thinking about, and we don't know exactly how to meet their argument. And to me, that's just an excuse to avoid having to have responsibility. Everything in the past is fine. Nothing can be improved.
Yeah. You got some
room. If we work at it, everything can be improved.
Yeah.
Even
Beautiful.
me.
Thank you. So, yeah, no, hard to imagine, right? You're perfect.
Yes.
But that idea is going to come back with Hanukkah. That are you diminishing through transmission? How is it different when it's a physical object versus an idea or a spiritual entity like Judaism, right? Or a tradition? Elliot, last comment, then we're going to, and then here, and then we'll go into the
Something
text.
you said early on struck me, and I think ties in with my values, and I believe what the values of the lady standing in New York Harbor, the Statue of Liberty, represented to me since I was a kid, and that is the idea that if they're endowed with a brain and creativity, they can make it on their own. They don't necessarily have to start out as CEOs for their first job. Is there not immense value in terms of working hard to go up the ladder?
Thank you. Thank you. And I thank you to Laurel for volunteering in the kitchen today. Thank you so much. Okay, last comment, and then we're going to dive in. And just in case we don't all know each other, because I do think you're a new face, at least for me teaching. Can you say your name, introduce yourself? Yes.
Gary Nidus. Okay, my question is, who are we trying to educate? What generation are we focused on? Are we not focused on the younger people as well as the seniors that have been disassociated over a period of time? What is the object of the education? Who is the audience that you're trying to reach?
It's an interesting question. I want to make sure I understand the question. Are you talking about the focus of a synagogue? Like today, are you asking where are we putting our efforts and attracting which generation or serving which generation, or what's behind your question? I want to make sure I understand.
Well, whatever we're trying to discuss in the way of, it's the history of our people. Okay. So like in America, when we send kids to school at an early age, they start out with the heroes. Well, who are the heroes that we embrace? Okay. In the history of the Hebrews, who are we teaching? So who are their heroes? Is it Moses or is it the Maccabees?
Yeah, interesting, right? So I think I'm hearing in your question a sort of who is our audience? What is the education we're trying to achieve? What are the role models based on generationally? Are we, for instance, like I'm thinking about the founding of Israel, and there was a Max Nordau. This will be circulated to whoever has a comment, but Max Nordau came along and said, it's not enough that we are idealizing our sages. because we live in a dangerous world where if the Jews are to survive, we need to move past this sort of image of a Jewish person as a yeshiva bocher, of a sort of nebbishy intellectual without any physical cultivation. And so he was saying we have to teach this new generation to look up to a different kind of hero, right? The pioneer, right? Somebody to work the land and defend the state, right? So maybe that's an answer to your question, but I do want to move on to our text because we've had a lot of comments. Go ahead.
Okay. In the school here, where am I going to?
That would be a question for Rabbi Josh Foster. Not sure.
Unless he knows about it, or they have a teacher who knows about it, and we'll make sure they know.
All right, we are going to dive into our text. Who would like to read our first one? Thank you. But you're also going to want to read the last one because it's Rabbi Sachs. But go ahead. You can open and close. Great. And here's the microphone.
Thank you so much.
The Gates of the Forest by Elie Wiesel, 1964. When the great Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov saw misfortune threatening the Jews, it was his custom to go into a certain part of the forest to meditate. There he would light a fire, say a special prayer, and the miracle would be accomplished and the misfortune averted. Later, when his disciple, the celebrated Maggid of Mezrich, had occasion for the same reason to intercede with heaven, he would go to the same place in the forest and say, Master of the universe, listen, I do not know how to light the fire, but I'm still able to say the prayer. And again, the miracle would be accomplished. Then it fell to the Rabbi Israel of Ritzin to overcome misfortune. Sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he spoke to God. I am unable to light the fire, and I do not know the prayer. I cannot even find the place in the forest. All I can do is tell the story, and this must be sufficient. And it was sufficient.
Thank you. So reactions to this tale, and I, of course, the rabbinic tradition always to quote L'Shem Omro or L'Shem Omra in the name of from whom you learned it. So I want to give credit to Rabbi Emmanuel Cantor, a colleague and friend of mine who taught me some of these sources and inspired this teaching today. But reactions from this text and how it pertains to what's lost throughout the generations, but also what might be gained or sustained. Go ahead, Jerry.
I think what it does is storytelling. It's a very Jewish idea. And convey the importance of the way that without it, you cannot invoke God's blessing.
So the emphasis of storytelling, the power of storytelling, and without story, you can't invoke God's, what did you say?
Good.
God's goodness, God's glory, God's help. There's one, I don't know if anybody here watched Game of Thrones, was into Game of Thrones. This is not a real spoiler because it's been out a while, but at the very end, the one who becomes the king who sits on that iron throne, which the whole series was about who's going to be the next one, is the storyteller. And that was controversial because people didn't like the ending. But the point being, there is something about the power of story to preserve, right? And even though stories change and stories may not be a totally accurate replication of what happened, right? Like I sometimes, I don't know if you have someone like this in your family, but my dad is an amazing storyteller, but sometimes we'll look at him and we'll roll our eyes because we'll say like, I was there and that's not how it happened, right? But he embellishes and right? It's like the movie Big Fish, if you've seen it. Yeah, right. But teaching, sure. Mm-hmm. Right. But I love that like inevitability of and the sadness of I don't know where that spot in the forest was. I can't access it. It's become inaccessible to me. And we don't blame them. We don't say that that generation is any worse for it. Like, oh, how could you be so empty-headed? Or how could you not have been organized enough to write that down? Or how could you, right? We don't blame them. We recognize that things inevitably get lost, but it's that desire to connect and stay connected and preserve and to pass down in the ways that you're able. And for God, it's sufficient, right? And in some ways, while it's less because we don't have that knowledge we used to have, in other cases, it's more because of how that story evolves over time. Go ahead.
I'm gonna take a clue from the name of the session, the tie that binds, and you touched upon it. I mean, we are essentially a covenantal people. And so if we ever lose that, we've lost it all. But what these people of all, you know, what this points out is that we're still engaging with God. They still feel there's that relationship, as you've mentioned. And it takes different forms in different generations. But what can change is the commitment to the covenant. And I'm curious, as we maybe later discuss, how the understanding of that covenant might change and whether that could break the significance of that tie.
And I think that's actually a great synthesis of what Rabbi Hal and I are now doing, because I know he's focusing on halakha and you know, Jewish law and shuvot from the CJLS. Yeah, this is a commercial plug for Rabbi Hal. But whenever they make a decision that is a weighing in on a contemporary issue of modernity, right? How do we as Jews address something that our sages couldn't have possibly commented on, because AI, for instance, or lab-grown meat, or self-driving cars, or things like that? But we always do it through deep engagement with the learning of our tradition, right? You can't just say willy-nilly, right? Or because it's the moral thing, according to you. It needs to be an argument carefully crafted from the sources.
People of retrieval, we're constantly retrieving things out of the past.
Great. So I look at it this way. This is my conception of Torah too, that it's an evolving, continuously unfolding text, right? It says do not add and do not change, right? So in that way, Torah is locked, right? You can't, but I do think that our understanding and interpretation of Torah gets deeper and deeper over time. It's continuously unfolding. We're continuously revealing and retrieving. And it's not passive. Yes, right. And that's a reference to Josiah, who found a document, who rediscovered the Torah and had a public reading of it. Some people think that was Deuteronomy, but it's so yeah, interesting. Yes, a couple more comments. We'll keep going. Shoot, thanks.
What?
Rabbi, please pass the microphone around.
Yeah, it's just going to create a delay, but let's get that to Shu. Thanks. I'll also repeat key things, but.
I think that the point that I'm making, which I read somewhere, was in connection with this paragraph from Wiesel, was the fact that we are a people of memory. And again, the rabbi couldn't remember this or that, but he could tell the story. He was preserving what he did remember.
Right.
And I think I'm sure it was in connection with Pesach.
Idea. That's great.
And it was something about the idea that we're a people of stories, but we're also preserving memories by it.
Absolutely, that's beautiful. And just a couple of things that's coming up to me through your comments and through this text, and then Karen, I'll call on you as well, is that there are certain things we can't do anymore that are inaccessible to us because we don't have a temple, right? Sacrifice, animal sacrifice. I don't think any of us are clamoring to bring that back necessarily, but we have substitutions that are supposed to evoke that memory, right? Shachrit, Mincha, Mariv, these correspond to temple services that we can no longer do, or Musaf, right? The Musaf offering, the additional service. These are things to stand in the place. It's as if we're saying to God, it's not that I don't know how to get to the forest. It says I can't get to the forest, right? The forest was burned down, right? I can no longer get there. So from my armchair, right? Or I don't know how to pronounce your name anymore. That Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey, Tetragrammaton. I don't know, it's been lost. I don't know how to pronounce that name anymore. Or, the high priest duchening, or, whatever, there are things that are no longer, we can't do because we don't have the temple. but I'm gonna do the Avodah service on Yom Kippur, right? I'm gonna add this special service that is a substitution. I'm gonna say the prayer from my armchair, so to speak. And God, I hope that this is sufficient. And this is a hopeful, lovely text that in the end, God accepts that and says it's sufficient. Go ahead, Karen.
It's all well and good to feel that that's important. Do you think I need that?
Okay.
I do think it's important that we can still commune that way, but we really do have to be careful that we don't lose the story too.
Mhm.
Because with each generation, we lost a little something.
Yeah.
Little something, but the idea was still there.
Right.
Don't lose that idea though.
Right. And again, this is the central tension of today's conversation, which is that what gets lost and what gets gained. And I think yes and yes. There are things that are lost and there are things that are gained. What's gained, I would say, is that if you look at, for instance, if you take the example of animal sacrifice, Maimonides says that God never wanted us to sacrifice animals. It was God getting us eventually to prayer, offering verbal, the words, not animals, but the words of our lips, right? The sacrifice of our lips, prayer, but that we needed to go on this journey, right? First, don't sacrifice our own children, right? Sacrifice animals, and then don't sacrifice animals, pray, but we couldn't go from A to Z. We needed that interstitial stage. So again, it's like what is lost, but also what is gained. Maybe this is part of a continuously evolving, unfolding tradition. Okay, I want to talk about one specific, thank you, tradition that has been lost and preserved in its own way, which is techelet, right? That blue fringe we put on and this is going back to the tie that binds, right? We don't actually know. Some people don't do techelet because they say we can't fulfill that mitzvah anymore. We don't know what that actual hue, what that color actually was. We don't know how to extract it because we don't know from how to get that, access that animal that it comes from, which is a certain kind of shellfish or snail kind of creature, which we'll read about. But so how are you supposed to do it if you're supposed to do it today? So let's dive into fringe, into tzitzit and techelet for a moment. Who wants to read Numbers 15:38? Go for it.
Speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner.
So real briefly, this will be a lightning round. What do tzitzit mean to you? Why do we do it? What is the significance of that mitzvah to you?
So it reminds you of the 612.
Remind you of the other 612, right? Remind you of the mitzvot. Good, a reminder, and that goes to what Shu was saying about being a people of story, right? We are so committed to our story that we actually alter our dress to remind us of that story so that we never forget it, right? Remind yourself, tefillin and tzitzit. Remember your story all the time by literally wearing and embodying that story on your physical person, okay? What else? What does that mean to you? What's the tzitzit about?
And yet now, people don't, like conservative people, we don't wear that, the Orthodox do, but we do other things that still remind, wear the talent.
Right. Right. So there's the talit katan and talit gadol, right? The small fringes that you might wear as an undergarment, either tucked or untucked. And some conservative Jews do. You just might not know, might be underneath. But otherwise, it's just by wearing the talit gadol, right? The big one, and when we daven. Yes, David.
Even that has some cultural realities to it because my Orthodox relatives, when I was growing up, didn't wear a talit katan. And now there's pressure to wear one. So is that meaningful? Are you actually remembering anything or are you just being a conformist?
Yeah, so good.
That's another problem.
Yeah, right. Sometimes it becomes a holier than thou situation.
So again, I'm not saying one shouldn't wear one.
Yeah.
I'm just saying
what's the meaning?
The reasons and meaning behind it sometimes get lost. And the same thing could apply, I suppose, to the talit we do wear. If we don't think about the knots, if you add up all those things, you're supposed to come to 613. Query how many people necessarily learned that lesson. And even if you are looking at them, we're not probably literally remembering 613 commandments. We have enough trouble counting which ones add up to 613. And there's, obviously some disagreement about that.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the idea of remembering it all. I'll offer that and then we can get the tequila.
Great. We pass it to Jerry and then we're gonna move on. Jerry, you actually have a mic right there. That's good. Yeah, yeah.
I think it depends on the circumstance. We have a now 4-year-old, but previously 3-year-old grandson who started wearing tzitzit at age 3 because that was the norm for his community. And of course, he did not understand the concepts that you're discussing, but it did make him aware that he was a Jew. And I think that for at least some people is enough in itself.
Yeah, so just the fact that this is an identity marker, right? And it says that you're a part of a tribe and a people. That is another aspect to me that I'll say that tzitzit makes me think of as Lador Vador, the tie that binds from generation to generation. What are the knots, right? What's the covenant that I am bound to? What am I intertwined with? What are my values? What am I committed to? What is inextricable from my identity or my values? Okay, so let's go now to Rashi and Ibn Ezra commenting on that verse from Numbers, trying to understand what Pelet is, what that blue color is. This is our third source. Anybody want to read? First, the Rashi, which is the first line in English. Go ahead, anything.
Die of or obtained from the blood of the chelazon, a kind of shellfish.
Yeah, hilazon. So it kind of feels like is this a real creature? Is this a mythical creature? Like it is apparently the blue dye obtained from the blood of the hilazon, a kind of shellfish. But we don't know necessarily how to find or harvest that kind of creature today. What did you say over here?
Why is it yarok? Yarok isn't blue.
Yeah, so it's a bluish green, some say. Yeah.
Shellfish.
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? There's debate as to whether or not. Yeah, right. You're right. Is it a snail? Have they found it? Have they not? It's not. I don't think it's totally clear, but I'm not an expert on it, so I'd be open to more conversation. Laurel, did you have your hand?
It's great.
Right. Right. So there's something very interesting, which is that for everything prohibited, there is an exception for which it's necessary, and talus is one, because what is talus a violation of? Shotness, not mixing wool and linen, right? So there is this very interesting phenomenon where many of the prohibitions, there is an exception which is a commandment, right? So often it's like, don't do this, but there is a way in which you can do it to make it sacred. Which is interesting. Okay, now the Ibn Ezra. The seats, the golden headpiece.
There's something in code.
Oh, it may also be like Chinese, I'm not sure. Okay, let's keep going. Then now this is the Ibn Ezra. Who wants to read it?
The reason the thread was blue is that blue is a sky-like color.
Okay, so here's offering a reason of why blue or greenish blue, whatever it was. The reason the thread was blue is that the blue is a sky blue color. So maybe when we're looking at our tzitzit, we're meant to think of the sky or invoke the sky, which I want to come back to. Okay, good. So Ron is saying, why would it be sky? Heaven, maybe it's Yirat Shamayim, right? Fear of heaven. You're supposed to fear or awe of heaven, right? Remember God. Remember this relation, which is exactly where we're headed. So who wants to read from Chulin, from our Talmud? Go for it. Nina, thank you.
What is the benefit?
Ooh, do you have a microphone? Yeah.
Microphone, please.
We got one. Thank you.
But what is the benefit imparted by the thread of sky blue wool? The Gemara answers, as it is taught in a Baraita that Rabbi Meir would say, what is different about sky blue from all other colors, such that it was specified for the mitzvah of ritual fringes? It is because sky blue dye is similar in its color to the sea, and the sea is similar to the sky, and the sky is similar to the throne of glory, as it is stated. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under God's feet the like of a paved work of sapphire stone, and the like of the very heaven for clearness. And it is written, and above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone.
So it's being directly linked to a couple of visions of God in our Torah. One is from Shemot, from Exodus, and they saw the God of Israel, and there was under God's feet the like of a paved work of sapphire stone, and the like of the very heaven for clearness. And then Ezekiel, in one of his Merkava, visions of God's sacred chariot and throne, has this vision of God sitting on a throne and as the appearance of a sapphire stone. There's this whole thing that's cryptic about when you see it, don't say water, water, because it looks like water, but it isn't water. So again, this sapphire throne being linked to the blue sea or the blue sky, and that's what the tzitzit is meant to get us, the tchelet is meant to get us to think of, which is God's throne. A couple comments here. Go ahead, David.
So while we're not sure what nobody ever accused me of being too quiet that I needed a microphone before, but okay. While we're not sure what techelet is, I don't know what word is being translated as sapphire, but do we actually know what that is?
Right. We're all on the topic of what color everything is, right? It's a good question. I'm not sure. Yeah, Sapir, Evan Sapir. Yeah.
So I'm glad, of course, that we're dwelling on this one thread that's blue, but it's in a sea of other threads.
Yes.
And it's in a garment, and none of, if this was all headed toward Ellis and remember God all the time, the whole thing would be blue unless you can't find enough snails.
But if you pull that blue thread, the whole thing falls apart.
So.
That's right, yeah.
So I think there's interest, and maybe we're getting to that and understanding the meaning of having the one amongst the many, or, right? So.
Yes, so let's go there then. Yeah, will you read our next one? So this is now, hold on, let me see if we're here. Yeah, so this is now we're in Menachot, another tractate of Talmud, talking about the actual mechanics of putting the fringes together and how you're supposed to do it.
It was taught when one begins to form the windings, he begins winding with a white string. This is because the verse indicates that one first inserts, quote, the fringe of the corner, unquote, Numbers 15:38. Meaning the white strings, which are of the same type as the corner of the garment. And when he concludes the windings, he concludes with a white string in accordance with the principle, one elevates to a higher level in matters of sanctity and does not downgrade.
Ma'alin bekodesh velo moridin. Keep that in mind. We increase in sanctity, we don't diminish, we don't decrease.
Is that saying that blue would be a decrease?
Yes, and here's why. Good question. So basically it's saying what you do is you do white thread, then blue, then white. And the reason is you cannot end with blue. It is because we increase in holiness, not decrease. So that kind of is counterintuitive, because you think the tchelet is extra sacred, especially if it's making you think of God's throne. Why would that be a downgrade? But I think the reason it's giving is if you go back to Numbers 15:38, in the order of the commandment, Daber el bnei Yisrael v'amart lehem v'asu lehem tzitzit al kanfei bigdeihem. So the tzitzit al kanfei bigdeihem, the fringes on the corners of their garments, that is the white fringe. And it gets first billing, right? First, God commands that, l'dorotam v'natnu lahem tzitzit kanaf tchelet. And on the corners, the blue fringe tchelet is second. That comes after. So we're a midrash class we've studied a lot of midrash together. We understand how the rabbinic mindset is working here to say that, if it got first billing in the Torah economy, which is very intentional, then the white fringe must be more sacred, and tchelet coming second is less. So that's why you start with the white, then the blue, and then you end with the white, because we can't diminish in sanctity, which we're going to come back to. We have to only increase, but then also it has to do with the knots, right? You do 2 knots and then 3, right? You wouldn't do 3 then 2, because that would be diminishing, and we have to increase in holiness as a principle, not decrease. Go ahead, Nina.
So I have a question about the color white.
First bottom.
Number of strand.
I'm not sure. That's a good
I
question.
think it goes up and starts low, goes high and comes back down.
Okay, maybe I'll look into that. I'm not sure. Yeah, go ahead though. Yeah.
Shame nobody here is wearing one.
So I have a question about the color white in terms of its meaning in religion. It has equated to purity. And it's interesting because I think in the color palette, white is the combination of all the colors, if I'm right, and black is the absence of
Yes.
for light.
For light.
Okay, so, you know, spiritually, there's some deep meaning in there. If white is the light, all the colors.
So the blues and the white.
Good, keep that in mind.
Right.
Because we're in our next, you guys are great at segues here.
Is
Yeah.
that a Jewish, is there a connection to Judaism with white as a more sacred color, or is that more Christian?
Yeah, there are plenty of verses. So one is that though your sins be red, you will, they will be like white as snow, right? That this, our prophets say, and then we quote this at Yom Kippur, right? That
Oh, we do wear white.
right. But white also has has leprosy connotations, right? If you look and it's the skin is turned white and right, so it's not all good, but that's impure, right? That's tameh. But otherwise, there is plenty that connects white with purity and right, the Kittel somebody mentioned and angelic, that kind of a thing. Sheila, and then let's keep going. Wonderful. Good. So Sheila is saying that if this principle is to be applied to the lifespan, that we do not decrease in sanctity, we increase in sanctity, then the older you get, the wiser or the more sacred.
White at 7.
Then you turn, there you go. Thank you for looping that in. We tie it, right? That's seva, right? Good old age, good white hair, seva. So yeah, but that is actually part of what I want to get at, right? That if we're asking the question of like, do generations diminish, or do they get worse, right? I think there is that instinct to say like, what's the matter with kids these days? Or, they don't make them like they used to. And I think there is a truth to that. And I think that's sort of the tension of the conversation today, further away from Sinai, further away from the good old days, further away from, the original source of knowledge, then it's entropy, right? Things naturally decline. But then there is this flip side of the debate, which is, no, we only increase in holiness, we don't decrease. We have more than we had back then, or we have the benefit of those who came before us, or we're able to reach things that were inaccessible before, but at the same time, things are inaccessible to us that were once accessible. Go ahead.
That does not allow for changing in our observance or our concept of Judaism. So yes, it may be different than it was 3 generations before. Doesn't mean it's less Jewish.
Exactly, and sometimes I'd make the argument that it actually becomes more closely connected to what was through change, right? Because there is this misnomer that some communities do it the way it always has been done. For instance, there's sort of this, let's talk about mechitza at an Orthodox service. Like we have in our minds, that's how it's always been done. But there's no archaeological evidence that is the way Judaism was and that the Orthodox have preserved that. Also, the way that they dress, you might say, that's how Jews have always dressed. But like, no, it's replicating.
3 centuries old.
Yeah, it's only 3 centuries old. Same thing with Debbie Friedman's Misha Berach, right? We say, that's how it's always been, right? No, that is this generation, right? She only recently passed, right? But we get it in our heads that, this is the way it's always been done, when really the only constant is change, right? And that's the most Jewish thing in the world, is adapting to the need for change to survive and to evolve our tradition. Go ahead.
Which ties into the Talmud, the Torah, that commentaries, discussions, arguments, over the centuries. So I think that's indicative of why we're evolving constantly.
Absolutely.
Because there is no one answer.
Right. Okay, Bill, and then let's go to the next sort of text.
Yeah, it seems like it's not so much that we're averse to change, it's just rate at which we change, that we have to discuss
Yeah.
as Jews.
Sure.
And I know that, my Orthodox friends, and we know, if it's been a tradition in your family for what, 1, 2 generations, it becomes
Right.
halakha, it becomes what you do. So we accept changes, but we don't accept them overnight.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's really what we're seeing when we talk about even one generation. Maybe one generation is not long enough in some cases to accept change. And so we think they're stupid or they're dumb, but a generation or two later, as you're saying, it either amplifies or at least it gets integrated. So I think there's that perception.
Right, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, let's read the next text. Who wants to read? This is called The Blue of Distance. This is a secular text. It's by Rebecca Solnit, The Field of, did I skip him? Oh, I did. This is bringing us to Hanukkah, okay? This is bringing us to Hanukkah. So go back one to the Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat 21b. Who wants to read? This is going to that, if anybody else's ears were burning when we said one elevates and doesn't diminish, did anybody connect it to Hanukkah? This is that connection. So who wants to read? Was that Karen? Did you want to read? Go for it.
Microphone.
Sorry, it's we don't have a microphone here, but you can read it. It's that last text. Karen's reading for us. Good. We got it right for the final word.
Nobody's ever told me I needed a microphone.
Yeah, but I will summarize. So all good. So we have this debate between Shammai and Hillel, these two schools around the sages, Hillel and Shammai, and usually we know that Hillel usually wins, and in this case, he does. The debate is Shammai says that we should start with 8 candles and then each day take a candle away, and that's how you mark the progression through the holiday, that you finish with 1 candle. But Hillel says the opposite. He says, no, you start with 1 and each day you add another one because as Jews, we should be bringing more light and not diminishing, right? We increase in sanctity and holiness and we do not diminish. And sorry. Yeah, oh yeah, maybe that's good. Now we have 1 on each side. It's good. But that's also how you mark time, right? The Hanukkah is about marking time. And your philosophy pertaining to the passage of time, are we diminishing from that original light? Are we adding to that original light, right? Which we'll circle back to in just a couple texts. But now for the blue of distance, who wants to read? Rebecca Solnit from a book called A Field Guide to Getting Lost. She's a contemporary author. Yeah, great. Thanks, Larry. Go for it.
I was gonna say it's there. Which is. The world is blue at its edges and in its depth. This blue is a light that got lost. Light at the blue end of the spectrum does not travel the whole distance from the sun to us. It disperses among the molecules of the air. It scatters in water. Water is colorless. Shallow water appears to be the color of whatever lies underneath, but deep water is full of the scattering light. The purer the water, the deeper the blue. The sky is blue for the same reason, but the blue at the horizon, the blue of land that seems to be dissolving to the sky, is a deeper, dreamier, melancholy blue, the blue at the farthest reaches of the places where you see for miles the blue of distance. For many years, I have been moved by the blue at the far edge of what can be seen, that color of horizons, of remote mountain ranges, of anything far away. The color of that distance is the color of emotion, the color of solitude and of desire, the color of there seen from here, the color of where you are not, and the color of where you can never go.
So it's a beautiful description of the inaccessibility of blue, right? Of tchelet, you could say, right? Of this, we don't know what that color really was but we have, what we have in front of us is a derivative of that original that we no longer have access to, right? What my friend Rabbi Emanuel Cantor, who taught me this, called it was generational distance, right? Like we don't have at our fingertips, at our disposal, that brilliant light that is generations away from us. But we can see, like with the tchelet that we might have on our talis, even if that's not quite, it can't capture that original blue, but we have an echo of it, right? And that's deeply meaningful, whether it's the story, but we don't know the place in the forest anymore, or we don't know how to light that fire. Again, a Hanukkah image, right? We no longer know how to do that, or how do we do it? Is it 8 candles and then is it 1 candle? And then how do we might not know how we're supposed to do it, but in passing it on, right? In binding it to the corners of our garments, in kissing it, in letting it be a reminder always, we're still connected to it. And that diminished color doesn't necessarily mean that that we've lost access to what's behind it, right? And that there aren't still ways that we can further what's behind it. So reflections on this,
Are
yeah.
you saying that, maybe I'm going too far, that it could be a string of any color? That it could be a string of any color as a reminder that there used to be a blue one that we can't find?
It's a good question. No, I mean, the simple answer is no, because as with anything Jewish and rabbinic, it's got to be a very particular, specific way, and you have to pay this much money for it.
But based on what you just said, it sounds like it could be anything, as long as it's a reminder.
Yeah, no, I think I'm offering that more as a poetic or interpretive way to look at it, not as a halachic, like what you actually need to do to comprise tchelet. But I think symbolically and poetically and lyrically, that's how I look at it. It's like there is this blue that is inaccessible to us, but that we are still carriers of in a meaningful way, and we further in our own way. But there's a wistfulness and a longing and a sadness, a melancholy blue, right? And not being able to actually have access to certain things anymore, or certain brilliance, or certain things that are lost in the generations.
Out to me here is this color of that distance is the color of an emotion. So there are these emotional nuances connected with these things that we try to look back into. We've lost. There are feelings there.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Sometimes, I mean, how many times have you been telling a story that you're butchering in real time? Right? It's like, oh no, like this is a great story. I'm not telling it exactly the right way, or a song, right? Oh, it's a beautiful song, but I'm not quite getting the notes, but I have it in my head, right? There's this brilliant, and I just can't quite, that's sort of how I think of the emotion that's being described here, where it's like, oh, it's on the, it's right there, but I can't quite, it's inaccessible. The complete beauty of it, I'll never be able to replicate. But I still have that story, right? And maybe in some ways, if I'm embellishing, if I'm a good story in the hands of a good storyteller, in some ways, maybe it's improved from its original. And in some ways, maybe it's diminished, but there's something, the very fact that you're telling that story, maybe there's a deeper beauty there than because of benefit of so many generations, because of that distance, right? It's one thing to tell the story a couple years after it happened. Isn't there a deeper profundity in telling that story 3,000-4,000 years after, right? Doesn't actually deepen the texture and color and radiance of that story, even if we're messing it up, even if we're mucking it up, right? The very fact that we are still so tied and bound to it and committed to it, that actually offers a deeper beauty than each year, increasing in holiness and not diminishing. Okay, I promised that Francis could read Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, our resident Anglophile.
To light another light, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. There's a fascinating argument in the Talmud which debates the following question. Can you take one Hanukkah light to light another? Usually, of course, we take an extra light, the shamash, and use it to light all the candles. But suppose we don't have one. Can we light the first candle and then use it to light the others? Two great sages of the 3rd century, Rav and Shmuel, disagreed. Rav said no. Shmuel said yes. Normally, we have a rule that when Rav and Shmuel disagree, the law follows Rav. There are only 3 exceptions, and this is one of them. Why did Rav say you may not take one Hanukkah candle to light the others? Because, says the Talmud, Kamachish mitzvah, you will diminish the first candle, inevitably you will spill some of the wax or the oil. And Rav says, don't do anything that would diminish the light of the first. But Shmuel disagrees, and the law follows Shmuel. Why? The best way of answering that is to think of 2 Jews, both religious, both committed, both living Jewish lives. One says, I must not get involved with Jews who are less religious than me, because if I do, my own standards will fall. I'll keep less. My light will be diminished. That's the view of Rav. The other says, no, when I use the flame of my faith to light a candle in someone else's life, my Jewishness is not just diminished, it grows, because there is now more Jewish light in the world. When it comes to spiritual goods as opposed to material goods, the more I share, the more I have. If I share my knowledge or faith or love with others, I won't have less. I may even have more. That's the view of Shmuel, and that's how the law was eventually decided. So share your Judaism with others. Take the flame of your faith and help set other souls on. That's beautiful.
And lovely, right? It's what?
It's true. It's
Oh, you always have to yuck the yuck.
Yes, he's afraid that he'll shift practice. In the second case, he's actually not saying, oh, we can just vote this. Your practice will stay.
But maybe he's dismissing the fear unfairly, right? He doesn't correctly engage with the actual fear. I think that's fair, yeah. But I think, was it Jerry who said this at the beginning about the difference between a physical thing and an idea? Who was it who said that? Somebody, or maybe it was Nelson. It was Nelson who said it, right? That there's a difference when you're transmitting a physical thing, like that water analogy, right? That you pour into buckets, inevitably things get spilled and you have less, right? Versus an idea, which is more like fire. And Torah, which is compared to both water, but also compared to fire. In this case, I think with Hanukkah, let's go with the fire comparison, which is that fire, the more you light candles from it, it doesn't diminish. It grows in ma'alin b'kodesh, right? It increases in sanctity and in light without diminishing from that original flame. And so I think that's the beauty of this Jewish project to which we are all bound and committed, which is that generation to generation, even though there's that instinct to say that they don't make them like they used to, or each generation diminishes, that Jewish corollary is that actually with this sacred fire of Torah that we're transmitting from generation to generation, more light can be spread in the world without diminishing from that original light. And that's the corollary or the exception to the rule of entropy, right? That things degrade over time.
I think you could compare that to tzedakah.
Mm-hmm.
You're not giving, you're increasing for all.
Nice. Beautiful, right? You could say tzedakah, if I give my money away, I have less money, and so it's diminishing. Or you could say, no, the more you are spreading, right? With the ways in which you are improving the lives of others, with the ways in which you're making the world better, that returns on the investment, right? Those are the dividends. The Karen Kayamet, L'olam haba, right? Yeah, Tikkun olam. Less is more. Yeah. Larry, go ahead.
You know, the one thing that I'm seeing overall, I'm relating it also to the first reading and your question of the generations, is that this is kind of saying, to me, it's giving us permission to be who we are, because we're saying we're not as good as the previous, but this is kind of, to me, saying the opposite. It's saying that, especially in the first one, he didn't know the prayer, everything else, but it still worked.
Mhm.
So we're sort of comparing ourselves to the previous, oh, they were much better because they had sacrifices and everything else.
Mhm.
And this to me is saying, we're just as good, we're in a different way, that you don't necessarily need to have all this emotion, a great leader, everything else. As long as you're doing something and you're passing it on to the generations and you're keeping it, that's just as good what you're doing now as past generations may have done a whole lot more,
Mhm.
but you're still holding on to it.
Yeah.
It's okay what you're doing.
Amen. Beautiful way to conclude. So Chag Urim Sameach, early happy Hanukkah. Next week we'll meet again and we'll have a Hanukkah theme. So we'll dive more into the theme of Hanukkah for next week. And please do, thank you for circulating this. I have some registration because we'll order dinner as lunch. So we'll order lunch in. So it's good to have numbers.